Welcome, welcome everybody. Greg Peterson coming to you from the urban farm in the heart of Phoenix, Arizona. I hope you're having a wonderful year this 2019. Today, we're going to be talking about regenerative composting. And when I first came up with that term, people would say to me, what? What's that about? So we got to distinguish a few things before we actually get into the process that I've set up here at the urban farm that I call regenerative composting. And we're going to start by jumping into what is regenerative and what is degenerative. So we're going to start by defining degenerative. And human beings over the past millennia or so have created many, many systems. And those systems, all of them, as far as I can tell, are degenerative. That basically means that the older they get, the more it costs, the more waste they produce, the harder it is to keep them up. And I've looked for many decades at this whole notion of degenerative assets or degenerative systems. And I have yet to find something that is not a degenerative system in the human condition. So degenerative resources are anything human generated. They're always linear in nature. The concept is this concept of cradle to grave. There's always an end in sight. You know, like the desk that I'm sitting at and the chair that I'm sitting in, over time they deteriorate, and it takes time and energy and money to keep them up. The same with our bridges and our water systems and so on and so on. So what I like to do is I like to jump in this new way of thinking. And I first discovered regenerative systems when I studied permaculture about 30 years ago. Now, regenerative systems are anything circular in nature. It's a different concept. Remember the linear concept of degenerative. Now I'm talking about the circular method of nature. Really, that's where it's at. It's anything that nature comes up with is regenerative. So they use everything, these systems use everything in the process. There is no waste. They're only usable products that are created. Every aspect is considered and used. And interestingly enough, this regenerative is a collaborative method. So when I was really young, I studied and looked at this whole notion of starting a fish farm. Now I live in the desert, and doing a fish farm in the desert is pretty crazy. Maybe we don't have a whole lot of water, but that was what I was really interested in earlier. And what continued to not make sense for me is that these fish farms, and I visited one day, and they were raising fish at it, and they were cleaning the fish, and they were throwing away everything that was left over. Now when you're raising fish, you have 30% meat and 70% everything else. They were throwing away 70% of what was there. And that just didn't make sense to me. So back then in 1981, I didn't call it regenerative back then, but I designed a system where everything got used that farm was producing. And it turns out a decade later, when I took my first permaculture design course, that I got to understand and see, oh yeah, there's a place on the planet where this stuff actually works. It works this way. And so look to nature for regenerative resources. And when I looked to nature to design my regenerative composting system, things changed here at the urban farm. So again, regenerative resources are anything that's nature created. They're circular in nature. They're perpetual. And the notion is cradle to cradle. So that's regenerative and degenerative. Let's talk a little bit about composting and what composting is. Composting really is a method of breaking down biological waste, whether it's manure or food waste. And it's quite a extensive process if you really want to do it well. And the reason to do this is we need to divert all of that stuff from landfills to our gardens, really. And there is an amazing amount of food waste here in Phoenix. In 2008, we came up with a number from the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, 1,100 tons of food waste per day in the Phoenix metropolitan area. That fills up the landfills. It creates greenhouse gases. And what we're really wanting to do in the notion of composting is we're wanting to build healthy soil, retain moisture, and fertilize our plants. So let's look at the difference between compost and mulch real quickly. This is the picture on the right. That's mulch. Mulch is great for around your trees. What we're trying to get to when we're composting, going through this composting process, is what you're looking at in my left hand there, which is, nicely broken down greens and browns. That's what we do in composting. We take greens and browns and we make them into the compost you're seeing there. So the challenges with thermophilic composting. Now, when somebody says composting, what they're generally speaking to is this notion of thermophilic composting or hot composting. And hot composting can be challenging. And it can be challenging for these 5 reasons. The biology of it is what drives the compost. And it's a fairly complex process by which nitrosomous bacteria feeds on the ammonia and it converts it into nitrates, and nitrobacter bacteria, it converts the nitrates into nitrites. I think it's nitrates and nitrites, or it's one way or the other. And in order to efficiently make compost, you need to make that happen. And you need to make it happen with compost materials, 40% greens. Those are things that are still alive, that are green, that are soupy, that, the food waste out of your kitchen that is actually still alive. And browns, about 60% browns. And browns are those things that are dead: leaves, straw, alfalfa, sticks, that kind of stuff is browns. And what we have to do in order to be successful with thermophilic composting is we need the right volume. And I've found that unless you have around 60 cubic feet, unless you have around 60 cubic feet of greens and browns, it's really hard to get a compost pile going. 60 cubic feet, imagine 65-gallon buckets of materials to make this stuff go. And then you have the moisture and the aeration. You have to keep it wet enough so that it's not too wet, and wet enough so that it's not too dry. Oh my gosh, what's he mean by that? And then there's time and temperature. The temperatures need to get up to 160 degrees, and when they start dropping down from 160 degrees, you have to turn the pile, you have to wet it. Yes, it's this complicated. There's got to be a simpler way. And what got me to the simpler way was 2 things. Looking at how nature does things and implementing those things in my compost bin and in my yard. And I like to call that regenerative composting. Basically, it's this notion of circular composting. And there's multiple components of regenerative composting, and I'm going to go over those right now. And it starts with me at the urban farm with our chickens. So I have about 10 buckets a week of compostable materials that comes in from a local restaurant. And I go down there once a week on Thursdays, and I pick up these 10 buckets, and it's made up of kitchen scraps, which are lettuce, cucumbers, tomatoes, those kinds of things. There's no meat waste in it. There's just green waste in it. And that's about 50% of the buckets that I get from the restaurant. And the other 50% is coffee grounds and tea grounds, which make really great compost. But these are all greens. And so one of the first places that the greens go is to the chickens. the chickens are a great place to start disposing of your kitchen scraps. And if you just have a normal amount of kitchen scraps, like you would in a typical home, I was going to say normal, but who's normal these days? In a typical home, you really don't have enough to start a thermophilic composting system. So one of the things that I suggest that people do is you get 3 or 4 chickens. 3 or 4 chickens will make mincemeat of whatever kitchen scraps that you have, and they do a really nice thing for us. They convert it to chicken poop, which makes really great fertilizer. So the Urban Farm Food and Yard Waste Disposal Program starts with the food scraps going to the chickens. And for those of you that are familiar with permaculture and the permaculture chicken, this is a diagram about this asset that we call a chicken. And I like to think that my chickens in my backyard are fairly regenerative. And it outlines what a chicken needs, their products and behaviors, and their intrinsic characteristics. And chickens are great workers in your backyard. In fact, I am a big proponent. If anybody has a little piece of land, you should have some chickens that help you work out your backyard. Because chickens, they eat weeds, they eat bugs, they leave fertilizer behind, they do some great tilling. Our hens are our pets, so we only get eggs out of them, although in the past I have had meat birds where I actually raised the meat birds and butchered them and got meat from them. So that's also a possibility. So by doing this, the chickens as composters, they reduce our feed and fertilizer costs, they eliminate pests, they eat landfill waste, and they provide us eggs. And quite honestly, for my sweetie, she loves them, and they make her happy every day. So that's step 1 of my regenerative composting system here at the Urban Farm. Step 2 are my worms. So if you don't want to have chickens in your yard, and all you have is a typical amount of kitchen scraps, really a worm bin is what you need to do. The worms will take all of those food scraps that you have and they'll turn them into this great soil. So what we're doing with the worms is we're feeding the food scraps to the worms. They're making chicken poop, they're making worm poop, or worm castings as we call them, which is great fertilizer for your gardens. So worms as composters, they're turners, they're mixers, they control pathogens, they aerate the soil, they do all of these great things for us. And it's actually super simple to keep worms in your yard. Thing is, you never want to put worms in your thermophilic or your hot composting bins because it'll cook the worms immediately. So you don't want to do that. So worm composting is not hot composting or thermophilic composting. And it's really super simple to do. There's worm bins that you can buy. There's stories about how people, take a 15-gallon tub and make it into a worm bin. All super simple to do. The third place that my food scraps go is to the soldier flies. Now, soldier flies are these really curious creatures. They actually look more like, here's the next slide, they actually look more like a wasp. You will never find them inside. And they eat as grubs, which are the ones on the left. As grubs, they're eating twice their body weight every day in food waste, which makes them huge consumers of food waste. And what they convert it to is soldier fly poop, which is a nice fertilizer, but they also turn into these grubs. The grubs are the ones that are in the middle. And these grubs are high in protein, they're high in calcium, and the chickens, for chicken feed, this is one of the ways that we reduce our chicken feed bill here at the Urban Farm. The chickens go nuts for them. They absolutely love them. Also, if you're doing aquaculture or aquaponics, the fish will love them as well. So all of these things drive the nutrients to compost. The chickens are converting this food waste to chicken poop, which you can put directly around the basins of your trees. You don't want to use that chicken poop directly in your garden soil because it's what they say is it's too hot. The worms make worm castings or worm poop. That you can use directly in your gardens, no problem. And the soldier flies make soldier fly poop, but they also make a really nice nutrient-dense treat for your chickens, which then make chicken poop and drive more nutrients to your compost. And so this is where the process ends, and this is where it starts. Because what we're doing is we're raising all these critters and animals. They're making a product for us that make nutrient-dense soils that then grows healthy groceries and starts the process over again. Would you like to see what it looks like here at the urban farm? This is my diagram. This is the urban farm regenerative food waste system. So we actually have multiple places that we get food waste from. As I mentioned, the restaurant earlier, we get food waste from the restaurant. We also get food waste from our kitchen, and we've also trained my mom and 3 of our neighbors to bring us food waste. So we have an abundance of food waste that comes through the gate and the front door of our house. And they are used to build this circular, see the circle part of it? The circular regenerative part. So we got the food waste. It goes to the chickens. It goes to the soldier flies. It goes to the worms that make worms castings. Immediately, we get eggs. The chickens eat it, make poop that provides nutrients for the compost, nutrients for sheet mulching, that feeds our soil, that goes to grow healthy food, and that healthy food feeds our soul and our belly, and it starts the whole process again. And this is really simple for anyone to jump in and do. I would suggest, if you're looking at doing this, start with one of them. Maybe start with worms. Worms and chickens are the 2 easiest ones to manage out in this. And start your process. What I always encourage people to do is start easy. Pick one thing. Don't overwhelm yourself. Because what happens when we overwhelm ourselves? We get discouraged. We stop. So step back. Take a look at this regenerative composting system and say, you know what really excites me are the soldier flies. And start with the soldier flies. Or the worms, and start with the worms. And all of these things, the basis and the underpinnings of this, the basis is creating healthy soil. And so anytime I get an opportunity to have this conversation, I do with people, and that is creating healthy soil. Soil is the most important job for you as an urban farmer, as an urban gardener, anybody that's growing anything. The most important thing to do is build healthy soil. And there are 5 components of healthy soil. It's dirt, organic matter, water, air, space, and everything that's alive in the soil. Now, dirt is typically what we have, and good luck trying to grow anything specifically in just dirt. Generally, it doesn't work very well. The dirt is usually highly compacted. It's missing organic matter. In fact, here in the desert, we have less than 2% organic matter in our soil, which is a crazy low amount. So one of the ways that I fix unhealthy soil is through my regenerative composting system, but also by adding organic matter, adding mulch to the top, adding compost to the soil. Often what I will do is add around the basins of my trees. I take the hay and the chicken poop right out of the chicken coop, and I just put it around the base of the trees, and it soaks in over time. So often the fix for your unhealthy soil is adding lots and lots of organic matter. And then I let the weeds show up and let them do their digging, because what they do is they'll dig down and create airspace that the water can get through. And then all of the life in the soil can breathe better, and you have healthier, happier soil. I put together this series called Healthy Soil Hacked. It's a video series. You can find it there. One of the things that I talk about extensively is Perry's Instant Box Garden. This garden here was installed in 2008, and it's still active and being gardened in. This box garden was installed in 2008 in my friend Perry's backyard. And it is a gravel backyard, and the box is 4 foot by 8 foot, and she wanted a garden back there, and all she had was gravel. So what we did is we raked back the gravel, and we built that box for, I think, $44 at the time is what it cost me for parts to build the box, and it cost me less than $50 for the soil to go in it, the compost to go in it. So she ended up with a 4 by 8 garden box that, like I said, to this day, she still grows groceries in. And all we did is I took a nice planting mix and put it in the box, and then we planted, and it just worked. So creating healthy soil, that's the bottom line for anybody that wants to grow healthy food. Using the regenerative composting system, this is just my version of a regenerative composting system. What is your version? Create it. Remember, what we're trying to do is to get these nutrients to travel through the system in a circular motion. Thank you very much for listening to me today, and I'd love to see you on the flip side. Check out healthysoilhacked.com, and thanks for gardening.